Hello for the 6th week in the year, February 15, 16, and Matthew's Gospel 5, 17 to 37. Let me tell you something maybe that most of you don't realize. Two things about Jesus. One is that Jesus wanted to be a good Jew, period. And two, Jesus did not make or institute the church as we know it. Jesus was a Jew, Jewish family, and his whole interaction mainly was to deal with the Jewish people. Jesus wanted to be a good Jew. In today's gospel, Matthew, he was preaching to or writing to or concerned about the Jews also. And so in 5, 6, and 7, we have the Sermon on the Mount. And Matthew writes this, composes this, and, Jesus didn't get up there on the mountain and then give chapters 5, 6, and 7. No way. Matthew wrote chapters 5, 6, and 7. That's called the Sermon on the Mount. The other, Mark, Luke, John, they spoke to not just Jewish people, but to the Gentile world. St. Paul, same way, all his letters to not to the Jews as such, but to the Gentiles. Jesus, wanting to be this good Jew, would always quote the law of Moses, as found in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And he would talk about Jewish law, Jewish practice. He'd talk about the Pharisees and the scribes. And, in that Torah, there are about 613 precepts. We say, oh my gosh, how could you do and know all those things? Well, the Pharisees were pretty good at knowing those. In the Catholic Church, we have a book of Code of Canon Law from 1917. There were like 2,400 precepts in their laws. And they revised it in 1983. And right now we only have 1,752 precepts. So it sounds like the Jews had an awful lot, but so do we. But Jesus would look into these laws or the commandments and so forth, and he would give his insight. The late scripture scholar Ray Brown would always say that. Do you realize Jesus, he wanted to be a good Jew, and he looked into the Jewish law, and he gave his insights to that. And he wanted reform in the Jewish tradition with the Mosaic law. Well, it sort of sounds a little bit like our new Pope, who believes in the Roman Catholic Church and is the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and he wants to do and reform some of the things like in the Vatican Bank and the Curia and bishops, how they act and so forth. Jesus always spoke to the Jewish people. And I think we can see that in today's gospel. In the very beginning, he says, look, I have not come to absolve or abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. They're going to be my starting point. Maybe it should be our starting point, these 613 precepts found in the Torah. And so he comes out with 6 different, they call them antitheses, but 6 different statements, and they all began with, you have heard. And then he quotes the law, or the Torah. You have heard, for example, in today's gospel, You have heard, thou shalt not kill. Then he comes out and he says, but I say that you're not supposed to get angry with your brother or sister. Quite a difference. Much more. Second one, you have heard. You have heard that you shall not commit adultery. But I say that you're not supposed to look at a woman with lust in your heart and your head. Much more than just not committing adultery. And then the third one, you have heard about divorce. But I say, read it again. And this is Jesus, the minimal law, but I say. In today's gospel, there's really three more. The fourth is, you have heard about false oaths. You have heard about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say. And you have heard, love your enemies. No, I'm sorry. You have heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say. So there's 6 of those. And they're very powerful. They're power-packed. And he really calls to question the Pharisees and the scribes, and calls to question, we need to be more compassionate, loving, forgiving, more than just those 613 precepts. I think, just as the Holy Father is saying, we need not condemn, fill people with guilt, and scrupulously demand that you follow these rules and regulations if you want to be good. You got to be good by being compassionate, loving, and forgiving. So Jesus is unbelievably a good Jew. Really a good Jew. It was only later on where the other evangelists and St. Paul, they said this is the real stuff in Judaism, and it's not meant for just Jews, but it's meant for everybody, the Gentile world. And so Paul goes out, and the others preach to not just the Jewish community, but the world community, the Greek community, the other communities at the time. So goodness is what it's really all about. And I think that's how this whole thing called Christianity, Roman Catholicism got started. I cannot help but think of the Jewish people toward other people. You remember that movie, Schindler's List? Oskar Schindler, a Roman Catholic, saved over 1,200 Jews to the Holocaust. And Israel, the state of Israel, designated Oskar Schindler, a Roman Catholic, a righteous Gentile, because he did what was right. He not only fulfilled and followed the law, but he went farther and went past the law and deeper than the law. That's why Jesus Christ says, you have heard it said, but I say. He leads us deeper, more committed, more loving, more forgiving, even to your enemies. Jesus was not just a good Jew. He was much more than a Jew. He was the Son of God who had a revelation to the whole world. I find it interesting when we start looking at all different religions, and very often we find much what Jesus said in all these different religions. Have a good day.